Alcatraz was a fortress of cold stone, cold steel, and the cold, salt-laced wind of the San Francisco Bay that gnawed at your soul. It wasn't a prison. It was the end of the line, a place engineered to break the unbreakable spirits of America's most notorious criminals. On his first day, the new inmate, a stoic bank robber named John Jack Bennett, saw how the island worked its cruel magic. He watched a hardened killer, a man who had laughed at a death sentence, crumble into a weeping, broken child after just 1 week in the absolute sensory deprivation of the hole. An old, quiet inmate known only as the librarian, who had been at Alcatraz since it opened, spoke to Jack without looking up from his book. "This place doesn't break your body," he whispered, his voice like rustling paper. "It starves your soul. It takes away everything that makes you human: color, choice, hope." Jack, a man who had orchestrated his own life with meticulous planning, was about to learn that in a prison built to be a perfect gray hell, the most dangerous weapon imaginable was a single, impossible splash of color. The philosophy of Alcatraz was routine and regulation. Every single day was an identical, soul-crushing copy of the gray walls, the gray uniforms, the gray, tasteless food. It was a world meticulously scrubbed of individuality and beauty, designed to grind you down into a number. The goal was to erase the man you were and leave only the prisoner, a compliant cog in a perfectly ordered machine of despair. Jack, who had prided himself on his independence, felt his own spirit beginning to erode under the crushing, monotonous weight of it all. He saw the erosion in the other inmates. Their eyes were vacant, their shoulders slumped. They were ghosts haunting a concrete tomb before they were even dead. The warden, a stern man named Johnston, was a firm believer in this philosophy. He saw beauty and individuality as forms of chaos, weaknesses to be identified and stamped out. "You are here because you failed to respect the rules of society." Johnston's voice would boom over the speakers each morning. "Here, you will learn the meaning of absolute order." But even in a place of perfect control, things could be a sharpened spoon, a length of twine, a message passed in a book. Jack wanted something different. Not a tool for escape, but a tool for survival. Something the guards would never even think to look for. He found it during his work detail, unloading supplies from the ferry that was the island's only link to a living world. A tiny, dried seed pod had fallen from a crate of produce, a stowaway from the vibrant green hills of the mainland he could see but never touch. It was no bigger than his thumbnail. To anyone else, it was just a piece of trash, destined to be swept into the unforgiving bay. To Jack, it was a weapon of defiance. It was a promise. He smuggled it back to his cell, cupped carefully in his palm, his heart pounding with a forbidden thrill he hadn't felt since his last heist. His cell was a concrete box he hid in the soil. He had no sunlight. He only had a tiny, hairline crack in the concrete floor and a single, perpetually dripping pipe. For weeks, his project was a secret, sacred ritual of rebellion. He would meticulously collect dust and lint from the corners of his cell, mixing it with precious drops of water from his cup to create a pathetic, makeshift soil. He carefully placed the seed in the crack and, drop by precious drop, he nurtured it in the darkness. He named it the Escapee, for it represented a life that could grow beyond the walls. The librarian, whose real name was Silas, saw the change in Jack. The flicker of purpose in his eyes, the secret, almost imperceptible smile. "Be careful, son," Silas warned him, his voice low and urgent. "Hope is contraband here. It's the most dangerous thing you can possess. The warden will crush it if he finds it." "He can't crush what he doesn't understand," Jack replied, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. Then, one morning, after weeks of patient faith, it happened. A tiny, vibrant green sprout, an impossible color in this gray world, pushed its way through the dust. It was the first living, growing thing Jack had seen in years that wasn't another prisoner. It felt like a miracle, a message from a forgotten world. He guarded it with his life, using his body to shield the crack in the floor during the daily, humiliating cell inspections. The sprout grew, slowly, stubbornly, reaching for a sliver of light that reflected off the polished floor from the distant corridor lights. His secret couldn't last forever. One day, a younger, more observant guard, trained to spot any deviation from the norm, noticed Jack's strange, protective posture. The guard shoved him aside, expecting to find a hidden weapon or a tool. Instead, he saw the small, green plant. He was confused. He was looking for a threat, something that could aid in an escape. This was just a weed. Unsure of the protocol for such a bizarre discovery, he reported it to Warden Johnston. The warden arrived at Jack's cell, a cold, clinical curiosity in his eyes. He was a man who understood power, and he immediately sensed a challenge to his absolute authority. He looked at the tiny, defiant plant, then at Jack's unblinking, defiant face, and in that moment, the warden understood. This wasn't a weed. It was an insurrection. It was an act of creation in a place of decay. It was a symbol of a life that was not regulated by bells and bars, a life that answered to the sun, not to him. "Destroy it," the warden ordered, his voice flat and hard. A sentence passed on a blade of grass. The guard, eager to please, stomped on the plant, grinding it into a wet, green smear on the gray concrete floor. Jack felt a white-hot rage, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years, but he didn't move. He just stared at the warden, his silence a promise of its own. He was sent to the hole for a week, the absolute darkness, a punishment for bringing a speck of light into his cell. But the warden, in his cold, calculated cruelty, had made a critical mistake. He had shown the other inmates that the system had a weakness. He had revealed the one thing he was truly afraid of. The story of Jack's tiny flower spread through the prison in whispers, in coughs, in coded taps on the pipes. A seed of an idea, far more resilient than the one in Jack's cell, had been planted in the minds of 1,000 forgotten men. Inmates on supply duty, who once saw their work as drudgery, now saw it as an opportunity. They began to look for their own escapees. A man found a discarded apple core and carefully pocketed the seeds. Another found a potato that had begun to sprout an eye. Alcatraz, the grayest, most controlled place on Earth, was about to experience a secret, silent, and beautiful spring. When Jack returned from the hole, pale and thin but unbroken, Silas was waiting for him at the library. Without a word, the old librarian passed him a book. Tucked inside its pages was a single, vibrant red petal from a rose. "The men on garden duty," Silas whispered, a rare glimmer of light in his own eyes. "They're fighting back for you." The prison's small, manicured gardens, once a pristine symbol of the warden's absolute control over nature, had become the heart of the resistance. Inmates assigned to tend them began smuggling cuttings, seeds, and petals, distributing them throughout the cell blocks like forbidden hope. Tiny, secret gardens began to bloom in the darkest, most forgotten corners of Alcatraz. A morning glory vine grew in a ventilation shaft. A small, resilient dandelion pushed its way through a crack in the library floor. The warden was furious. He ordered relentless, brutal cell searches, but the inmates became masters of concealment. The guards were looking for shivs and ropes, for tools of escape. They were not looking for life. Slowly, the atmosphere of the prison began to change. The heavy, gray despair was being chipped away by small, secret acts of beauty. Men who hadn't spoken in years would share a quiet, knowing smile over a newly unfurled leaf. Hope was no longer contraband. It was a conspiracy. The warden realized he wasn't just fighting a few inmates. He was fighting nature itself, a force far older and more patient than his concrete walls. He made a final, desperate move. He issued a new order. All prison gardens were to be paved over with concrete. He would turn the last green space on the island into another gray, sterile slab, erasing the source of the rebellion. The day the work crew arrived with their wheelbarrows of cement, the prison was eerily silent. Every inmate stood at their cell door, watching. As the first shovels bit into the rich, dark earth of the rose garden, a single voice from a high tier began to hum. A low, mournful, and deeply human tune. Then another voice joined in from a different block. And another. Soon, the entire prison was filled with a soft, defiant chorus, a sound of collective grief and resistance that the stone walls could not contain. It was a weapon of pure soul, a sound the warden had no defense against. He had the loschi. He had tried to crush a single, tiny flower, and in doing so, had sown an entire garden of rebellion in the hearts of men. The story of the Alcatraz Flower Man is a powerful, true testament to the indestructible resilience of the human spirit. It proves that even in the most oppressive darkness, a single, small act of creation can be the most profound act of defiance. If this true story of hope inspired you, please show your support. by hitting that like button. Subscribe and ring the notification bell for more incredible true stories of the human will to survive. Now, we have a question for you. What is the one small thing, the seed of hope, that you would hold on to in your darkest moments? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.